Hello everyone, welcome to Retro Ratchet. Today's video is going to be about the MG Montego Turbo. So I'd say this is going to be quite an unusual video because it's about a car that I've actually just sold rather than one I own or I'm working on or are restoring. So why is it an interesting video? Well, a few reasons. First reason, when did you last see one? Let alone a bright red turbo. Most of them, I think it's fair to say, rotted away 10 to 15 years ago. At that point, they had very little value, but recently they have been increasing in value quite a bit. So I think in today's standards, they're very, very rare to see one on the roads. Secondly, this one spent 15 years in a field in France, rotting away. Around 7 years ago, it was brought over to the UK and restored. And the third reason, which I'll just come on to there, the car underwent a really detailed full restoration by its previous owner, Mike, to show standard. So it's went from one extreme to the other of sitting in the field, rotten, to show winning condition. And then I came along after all the hard work was done and bought it so I could just run it and enjoy it. So I guess the next question is why? Why did I buy that to add to the collection? Well, the first reason, I currently have an MG Maestro Turbo. I've had that for around 9 years. I'm ashamed to say for half of that time it's been off the road while I've been restoring it. So I have missed driving the Maestro. So I decided I'd like to get one just in the period of time it takes, to get this one finished off. But I thought rather than buy a Maestro, I should buy a Montego to try one of those. The second reason was back in 2005, I bought one to restore. It was a white one, G plate from memory. It was a basket case of a car, as a lot of them were. I think I paid something like £150. I bought it on sight unseen, had it trailered up. When it got here, it had a blown head gasket, it needed a turbo, and it needed welding from front to back. So over the course of about a year, I started getting stuck into the welding. I'd done sills, I'd done the floor, and then the project just grew arms and legs. I lost interest in it back then, like you sometimes do when you're in your 20s and you've got other interests, and I just scrapped it. So I kind of felt it was one of those ones that I gave up on that I maybe shouldn't have given up on. So I'd like to own again. So that explains the reasons how I came to own it. So I was fortunate enough to be provided with some of the photos of the restoration that took place about 5 years ago. It was a body shop was entrusted in cutting out the rusty metal, replacing, welding in new panels, then prepping and respraying the car to a high standard. And at the same time, there was other parts fitted, other pieces of trim around the windows, aerial, things like that. So as you can see from the pictures, it really was an excellent job that was done in it. Very, very detailed. The quality of the paintwork, it's got a great shine on it. And there was certainly a lot of man hours, I think, put into doing that. Right then, I'll talk a little bit about what it was like owning the Montego, I guess starting with the mechanical side of it. So luckily, the majority of jobs were done when I bought the car. Only a few came up in my ownership. First was fueling. So the thing with fuel, I think anybody who's owned a Maestro Turbo or a Montego Turbo, they'll appreciate the pain I went through to try and get it running right. I think the combination of an SU carburetor being fed by a turbo is just such a tricky setup to get right on something that age. So the problems I was having with it was it was running really, really well on boost, but it did appear to be overfueling on idle, which was annoying. It was also really, really hard to get running from a cold start. You would turn it and turn it and turn it, and it would eventually fire. So I thought the most sensible place to start fault finding here was probably the carburetor. So stripped it down, checked it all out, cleaned it, adjusted float height, reassembled it, and it still didn't run right. But what I did find is switching the stepper motor out for the cold start with the one off my Maestro turbo that I knew worked, it would start straight away. So that seemed to be the problem with the cold start. I mean, it's rare that these do fail, but again, the car did sit for a while, I guess, when it was over in France. So I put the one off the Maestro on it, and that got it running from cold. So that was one problem out the road. So next, I thought, let's look at fuel pressure. So I put a inline fuel pressure gauge, and it was reading high, which is what I expected. So these do tend to have issues with the return line on the fuel tank. So I checked the pressure regulator, that was fine, it was working. I checked the return line to the tank, there was no kinks or restrictions or anything. But the easiest thing to do here is simply just take the line that comes off of the fuel pressure regulator that goes to the tank, just take that off and run it into a petrol can, and then see what effect that has on the pressure in the system. So it was sitting at about 5.5 psi, which, you know, by today's standards is really, really low. But back then they were only meant to be running about 3.5-ish psi. So anything much higher, maybe over 4 psi, it'll overcome the float in the needle valve. So it'll start to flood the carb. So clearly we had some kind of issue with the tank return. And on these, the return feeds into just below the swirl pot, so they can corrode and gunge up. So what I decided to do was reroute the return line and T-piece it into the breather line. It's a solution that has worked for many others in the past. So we done that, rerouted that, and we had a great improvement. The pressure in the system dropped down, but it was still a little bit higher than I would have liked. So next I started looking at the fuel pump. The fuel pump had been replaced, but looking at the technical spec on the fuel pump that was in it, the flow rate was a fair bit higher than what the standard pump would have been in that car when it was made. So what I done is I sourced an equivalent spec one, fitted that, changed the fuel hoses when I was down there, and then finally we had a decent idle fuel pressure on it. So then it was just a case of adjusting the carb, you know, the mechanism on the side of the carb and the mixture. And then after quite a few weeks worth of work and, you know, tearing my hair out, it was finally running, and it ran really, really well after that point. So that was a bit of a relief that, you know, we got to the bottom of it and got it running perfect. Moving on from the running problems there, other than that, it didn't really cost me that much to own. The insurance, typically I paid, I think it was just under £100 a year. That was from A-Plan. Pretty reasonable on fuel. It was doing high 20s most of the time. In terms of the actual, you know, driving experience, I didn't feel that it drove like a car from the 80s. It felt a lot more modern to drive. The steering was super light, which is, I guess, typical of anything of that age. Suspension, really wallowy round corners. Absorbed speed humps really, really well though, which was a positive. Brakes, again, not up to today's standards, which you would expect. Still functional, of course, but they don't quite have that responsiveness or bite of a modern car. Performance-wise, it was actually really interesting. Typical 80s turbocharged power delivery. So I think 150 brake from the factory, but with them it was more the mid-range torque that was impressive. So around about 3,000 revs, the boost is built, and then that's you're taking off with all the associated noises that you get from turbocharged cars of that era. So it made it quite a fun experience. Thanks, Kit, telling us he still needs petrol. So yeah, so lots and lots of attention on the roads, lots of positive feedback when I took it to shows, stopped for petrol, stopped at shops, any of that kind of thing. Everybody was very positive with the, my dad used to have a Montego back in the day. It's great to see one in the condition that that one is in. So yeah, I think overall a really, really positive experience. So now into the last part of the video. This was a walk around I'd done a day or so just before I sold it. So I hope you found this interesting. Right, so this is a little walk around of the Montego a few days before I actually sold it. I mean, the video speaks for itself. The car is absolutely mint condition. There's no rust on it. The depth of the shine in the paint is super impressive. Bottoms of the doors, everything. All those trims around the window there, they were all replaced as well as part of the restoration. So in this video, I'm only going to show the one side of it because the other side's just exactly the same. Sills, as you can see, nothing on them. So there's not going to be many around in that condition. Right, we'll move on to the interior next. Pretty much the same story in the interior. The condition of the front seats. These did tend to wear quite badly. The dashboard, there's not really any cracks in the dashboard. They do bulge up a little bit like that. That's pretty normal. Door cards, again, same, they're pretty mint. Back seats, again, spotless. Thanks everybody for watching.
If you like, please subscribe. Wow.